You're right, guys. This is the first one of the American West. It's the same kind of thing I did in the booster. All right, but it'll be good to go back through. Again, make notes as we go through, but hopefully this makes sense. The second time we go through this topic. First one's going to be based on Plains Indians and government policy, so it's going to go more in chronological order here. All right. Okay, just again, quick introduction. You know the questions for this. You explain two consequences, use P paragraphs for this. A narrative account, the story that links, and the importance of question. Okay. Again, everything you do in this either tells a story or there's a significance to it. So think about the impact as we go through, the impact of each topic, of each bit. You have an hour and 45 minutes. This is 40% of your paper for Elizabeth and American West, okay? Do not neglect it. So we're starting with chapter 1. Again, we'll go through this in the correct order, and then we'll finish with chapter 3. Right, the first thing to note is the setup of the Americas. We're in the east, first of all, so where you see the Appalachian Mountains, and then you see the Mississippi River there, which is going to be important, especially the first Indian Removal Act. So this is where the white settlers are. In the middle, you see where the buffalo are. That's where the Plains Indians are, and then they want to get to California and Oregon in the west, where we'll know gold comes and also good farming land. Okay, so make sure you're aware of the geography. Now, living on the Great Plains, you've got to cope with things like the horrendous sun, the strong winds, the rain, the dry land, and the cold winters. So the extreme weathers have a massive impact, and we'll look at that in particular when we come across farming. So the Plains Indians that we mainly look at are these guys. Don't worry if you don't know all those names. I think the key ones there are the Sioux, the Arapaho, the Cheyenne. They're the ones we look at in terms of the wars. And the many different tribes. Remember, you get a greater nation like the Sioux, and you've got a lot of sub-tribes like the Lakota Sioux, the Dakota Sioux, etc. And they travel around in bands, and we're going to have a look in this first one. We're going to focus on their way of life and their whole tribal system, because if you understand what their tribal system is like, then everything else gets a lot easier. So they had adapted quite well to living on the Great Plains. They had to cooperate, so their whole tribal system was well organized and built to survive. They follow the buffalo, so everything they do is about hunting the buffalo. They're nomadic, so they go from place to place. They follow the herds, and they live in these teepees, these easily collapsible tent-like structures that they will rebuild as they go. So again, make sure you know that way of life. Make sure you know how the Plains Indians survive. That's important, especially to later on the topic where the Americans look to break that system. So they survive because of the family. Again, everybody has a role. Indian society, the structures, fighting and warfare, and their homes. So this is really how they adapt and survive. So it's all kind of brought together where everybody has a purpose. There's no one weighing the tribe down. They all kind of look to the buffalo to keep the tribe going. Fighting in war is important for reputation. Now I won't spend too long on the chiefs. I think the main ones: Red Cloud, Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse. These guys will come across in the Indian Wars, and we'll look at how they have a big impact later on. But there's not one clear leader in this. There's not one key chief. All right, they all kind of have their own little roles here. There's not one who speaks for all. Okay, warfare. So They often go to war mainly to protect their hunting grounds, to obtain horses. Horses are important for reputation, but also using to hunt the buffalo. The elders would use warfare as a way of keeping the rowdy braves, the warriors, under control, give them an opportunity to win this honor and respect in battle. It's useful to keeping the tribe unified. Counting coup is important. This is where you get the special stick and you've got to touch the enemy without getting killed and getting away. It's great honor to achieve that. Success, you get to have the feathers worn and horses captured. Scalping, used as a trophy. You would put them outside the teepee. To ensure his enemy's spirit couldn't take revenge in the afterlife. White people really saw this as savagery, but that's all a big part of the system. And look at the clash of cultures there. Whites saw these as barbaric and totally, different from what they saw as their civilized society. Whereas, this is all part of their spiritual belief system. And religion's going to be so important. The Great Spirit is the Wakantanka, who created the world and all that lived. Everything had equal importance and value. Then there was dances. You had things like the rain dance, the buffalo dance, and later on we'll get to the ghost dance. And this was connecting to the spirits, calling to the spirits. Again, we look at that, the ghost dance and the Wounded Knee Massacre, really one of the last things we'll look at during these sessions, comes in full circle. The land, there was real spiritual land. This is often when I make that connection to Avatar and how the people were so close to the spirits in the spirit world. They believed certain land had special value, in particular the sacred hills of Dakota. That becomes very important when we look at the Battle of Bighorn. So land's important. Again, this is going to be a problem when whites want them to move off certain land to access the gold, and Plains Indians won't move because it's the land sacred to them. The Sioux religion affected the attitude to the land because they were part of the land. The land could not be owned by anyone. They did not have this concept of owning land. They called the land their mother. So many Plains Indians couldn't abide by farming. So when whites were saying, "Why don't you try farm the land, grow crops?" they thought, "No way, you can't do that because that's ripping up the land. That's ripping up their mother." The good graphic on the buffalo. Make sure you know a few uses of the buffalo. It'll be very important later on, so you can pause and look through that if you like. But I think a couple of them, just make sure you have them in your locker. So that was generally the Plains Indians kind of belief system, how they view the world. You need to understand that because everything moving forward is disrupting the Plains Indians' way of life. And you need to show how that's happening. That's a big question in this, impacting the way of life of the Plains Indians. And most importantly, it will be the US government and their involvement and how their policy consistently changes over time here. So the government are, beginning to expand. The federal government's attitude begins to change. So, initially the Indians, they move further west, but eventually they want them just moved altogether, and this whole topic is all about that process. A great graphic, this one, because it shows 34 the states in the east, and then by 48 look at the expansion. They're really wanting to take over the Americas at this point, manifest destiny. But we need to look at reasons why they want to move, and we'll come to that. So the first one that you need to know about is the Indian Removal Act. It does what it says on the tin. This basically they remove Indians from the east and put them west of the Mississippi. So they need to. They gave them promises. They promised they'd never have to give up the land known as the Indian Territory. Of course, that's going to be a lie. You'll find that a lot when the U.S. states constantly change their mind on the acts they pass. So that's the main thing with the Indian Removal Act. So they were also, the Plains Indians were promised protection from other Indian tribes who had lived there before. So that's the first real policy we look at. Okay, good starting date, 1830. Then you've got the Indian Trade and Intercourse Act. So again, defined Indian Territory as all that part of the US west of the Mississippi and not within the states of Missouri and Louisiana or the territory of Arkansas. Basically, it was designed to keep whites and Indians apart. The government established a permanent Indian frontier. This would be manned by soldiers, and the forts would be built along it. It also prohibited settling on American Indian lands, prevented the sale of guns and alcohol with white traders. So again, at this point, the whites seem to want just a clear divide. You have that land, we'll have this land, and they're kind of happy with that. But we need to then see what changes. So these first two acts are important to show initial understandings between Plains Indians and whites, but then we're going to have a look at what changes. And one of the most important things is this War of Mexico. The US gained territory after this war. Texas in the south becomes part of the USA. Remember, Texas have the Vaqueros, who are the Mexican cowboys. So 1845, and then US get control of Oregon County, which is in the west. The British kind of give them that. Then after the War of Mexico, they gain these huge territories in the west, including California. So most importantly here, in the graphic you saw before, the Americans who were initially in the east now kind of surround the Plains Indians. They've got lands in the south and lands in the west, but what they need is now that land in the middle. So look at how their opinion changes. Look at how their policy is going to change. Now they've got a real reason to go through that Indian territory that they said they weren't going to touch. And the War of Mexico is a great reason for this. It gives them that purpose to start expanding and also migrating, getting through those plains. So yeah, that basically sums up what I said. And then you get the Indian Appropriations Act. Main thing to know with this one, this is where reservations start. So 1851, basically they're wanting to move the Indians in the Indian Territory onto reservations. Again, you'll find this whole topic is all about Americans changing their minds and moving Plains Indians around. These were the same Indians who had been forced to move from the eastern states, so they're getting moved again. Hunting lands were then allocated to some reservations, so the Indians could continue to hunt. But these reservations were far from the sacred lands, the burial grounds. It shows the whites had no real understanding of the Plains Indians' way of life. They literally wanted to keep moving them away from the stuff the whites wanted. And this is going to be leading to things like conflict. It's going to be leading to complete change in the way of life for these Plains Indians. And that's that. Just a quick one to start, just covering kind of the basics. You just need that real understanding of who the Plains Indians are and who the whites are at this point. And then the whole topic is all going to be about this expansion, this changing of the way of life of the Plains Indians. Okay.